the impact.
Living in a memory. Hey guys, thank you for coming in. Remember, this is Impact. And today we have a guy that we're really excited about. Remember, Impact is a podcast that, what are we looking for, Kev?
Impactful people in the community.
Yeah, we are looking for people that impact their world. And so today we are really excited to have Britt Gillette on. Britt is a financial guru. He talks way above. Sometimes I'm like, dude, I really need him to dumb this down. But then he comes right back around and explains it for guys like me and where I can get it. And that's what I love about Britt. Also, Britt is a Bible prophecy author. How many books have you written now, Britt?
It's 4 now. So
4
far.
books.
God willing, it'll be more.
So far, hey, that's more than we've written.
That's a good start.
That's a good start. So anyway, hey guys, again, thank you for coming in. And Britt, where can our people find you on the internet?
Well, you can find me on YouTube and Rumble. I have a site, endtimesbibleprophecy.com. If you put my name into a search engine, that'll come up. You mentioned books. People can find me on Amazon, anywhere ebooks are sold. So pretty much just Google my name and a whole bunch of things will pop up.
Do you have an Audible version of your book yet?
No, I do not.
No.
So
that's next.
That's next. It's coming.
Hard to get around to the time of doing all this stuff.
I heard it takes up a lot of time.
Yeah. We have a couple of books on marketing and things like that, and we're doing the same thing. We're like, I don't know if we have time
for the Audible stuff. Yeah, it's like,
Okay. So guys, today, Britt, we want to talk about the economy. And before anybody decides to click off, hang on a second, because this is practical. This is about your money, where we're going in the future, what signs we're seeing now, and where is all this going? So, Britt, let me just simply ask the question, then we want to turn you loose. Where is this economy? Not what the feds are telling us, but where is this economy based on what you're seeing truth? And then where is this thing going? And is this thing really designed to trap us? And if so, how and why?
Yeah, let me see if I can unpack all of that. But yes, right now, the economy is not the rosy picture. I mean, anybody that goes to the grocery store knows that the economy is not in the rosy shape that, the pundits on TV would like us to believe. We've had massive inflation for several years now that's directly impacting everybody's day-to-day life. In response to that, there's been this push for higher interest rates. And a little over a year and a half ago, I started pointing out to people, while these interest rates aren't historically high, 5% interest rate, 6-7% interest rate, we certainly had much higher before. But the percentage change of where we're coming from, which was pretty much near zero with what the Fed funds rate was, but we were seeing 2% mortgages a few years ago. To go from 2% to 7 or 8% in just a 3-year period, even less really, is a shock to the economy. You want to see that type of thing happen gradually. And oftentimes we see that the Federal Reserve, they're central planners. And we know that centrally planned economies historically do not work out well. And so they're making these decisions that should be made up by the free market. And it's causing things to break.
Yeah.
And we've been seeing some signs of those things. One of those that I've been pointing out a lot is that a lot of the banks invested the cash they received from depositors into federal debt, U.S. Treasury debt here in the United States and other countries. It's usually their local debt. And when you have those rates increase the way they do, the debt actually declines in value. So for instance, let's say I buy something for $100 and it has a 2% interest rate. Now it's at a 6% interest rate. it might now be worth, say, $70 or $80.
Right.
That's not a problem if I hold it for the length of that term and get paid the interest and then get the principal at the end. But what happened back in March of 2023, we saw Silicon Valley Bank go under, and we saw Signature Bank, First Republic Bank. These were the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in U.S. history. That's even accounting for inflation. If that had happened in 08, 09, they still would have been the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in U.S. history. And so we sort of passed over this, but why did that happen? Well, that happened because they saw this decline in the value of their holdings. And when people went to take their cash out of the bank, the only way they could redeem those people asking for their cash back was to sell those bonds at a loss. So right now, we have our whole entire U.S. banking system is around $800 billion of unrealized losses. Let that sink in. Wow. $800 billion collectively of unrealized losses. Now, if interest rates go the other way, a lot of that could turn out to not be realized, right? As long as there's not a bank run. But if people wake up at some point and start to go get their cash out of the bank, there's not enough there for everybody to get their cash back out, minus the government simply bailing everything out. And to do that, they have to just print more dollars, which does what? Well, it creates more inflation that we've been seeing for the last 3 years, makes it even worse. So they're in this position where no matter what they do, something bad happens. Either banks collapse and we have really a rerun of the Great Depression, or they bail out the banks and they bail out failing businesses and just print cash. Everything we saw 3 years ago where stimulus checks were being handed out, they would do that on an even bigger scale. And what was the result of that? Well, the inflation we've been seeing. So it would be even worse than that. It may actually lead to hyperinflation if people say, well, I don't want to buy US debt because look at how they're just printing this currency and the whole world dumps it. Well, then you have a complete loss of faith in the dollar and you have hyperinflation. So I think they're really looking at those two scenarios. And I think where we're probably headed is we're probably headed to that Great Depression scenario to start with. And the response from the politicians is going to be checks for your groceries. Nobody can afford groceries. Everybody gets $1,000 a month. Oh, now the prices are going up at $2,000 a month. And we're probably going to have that hyperinflation scenario somewhere down the road. But I think immediately the real threat is from a collapse, a credit freeze within the banking system, massive bankruptcies, much like we saw in 2008, 2009 for those who remember the great financial crisis, until it's able to get turned around by the panic printing that governments around the world are going to engage in. Because the only reason we didn't have all this happen back in the spring was there were a number of programs, including a newly created program called the Bank Term Funding Program. And banks borrowed in the US $100 billion that month. And what it was, they could take some of these underwater assets, give them to the government and the Federal Reserve, and in exchange, they receive the face cash value in order to be able to make those depositors whole. But they have to pay those back. It's supposedly a 1-year loan. So come March, that program comes to an end. It starts to wind down. My guess is that will not happen because it would lead to a global banking system collapse. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't make a mistake and think they cannot do that and that we don't see that collapse. Because those who remember the great financial crisis will remember that they bailed out Bear Stearns and a number of failed institutions prior to the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which was seen as the big catalyst for failing financial institutions all over the world and causing the financial contagion that we know is the great financial crisis. And then they made it a complete about face and started bailing everything out again, because if they didn't, the whole system would have collapsed.
So I have a question, Britt. We're hearing a lot of, especially over the last 3 years through the whole pandemic and all of that stuff, a lot of warnings, financial warnings, top guy analyst, everybody, they're screaming from the rooftops, everything's about to collapse. But it seems like they keep kicking the can down the road. And now we're in 2024. This current administration is not going to want to see things collapse now. Are they going to do something? Is something going on behind the scenes? Because you had, like I said, you had mentioned that something happened recently. You're not 100% sure. So things changed. The banks changed now, how they handle things. If I remember right, you had just talked about this the other day. How are they going to kick this thing down the road to at least try to delay it past 2024?
Past the election.
Yeah, past the election.
Yeah, no doubt they'll try that. They'll continue to, as I said, they'll probably extend this program that's supposed to end in March. They're going to do everything they can to keep this system together as long as they can, because it's the system that gives the people in control of it the power they have, right? So they're going to want to extend that as long as they can. We can talk in a moment about what system. They know this inevitably will come to an end someday. What's the next system going to be? How can they position themselves to be in control of that? But eventually what's going to happen is the free market will force their hand. So for instance, let's say that we get to March and they say, well, if we don't renew this program, we have a banking collapse. We're going to extend the program indefinitely. There's going to come some point where the people who are buying the debt that's being issued by the United States government say, that's a step too far. I think I'm going to sell this and buy gold, or I'm going to sell this and go to cash, or I'm going to sell this and go in some other direction, but I'm going to dump these and the interest rates will go up. And one of the things that we've seen over the past couple of years as we've seen these interest rates go up is the interest on the U.S. national debt is over $1 trillion a year now. So, and a lot of that rolls over a 5-year period. So if interest rates stay high for a couple more years, we're going to see that expand significantly. Soon be at $1.5 trillion, $2 trillion, et cetera.
Now, I had a question you were talking about. Do you think that the interest rates, they're keeping the interest rates high also to create a dependency on the government, for these checks at some point, so then they can gain more control? That's that's what I've seen, like, to where they want the average person to get used to getting those government checks, and then because then they have to go to daddy to go get their money, and then therefore they have control. Right.
Yeah, I think again, like we hear about the Federal Reserve raising rates, lowering rates. Ultimately, when you look at it, it's really the free market ultimately pushes them. The decisions they make usually align with what the market perceives they're going to do. So it's sort of it's like the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. He appears to have this power, but he doesn't really have it. The free market has that power. And when the free market wakes up and realizes the bind that we're in and that the Fed doesn't really have that power, that's when I think we see the panic.
If they wake up, and hopefully your message will help that.
So I think my next question is now we know the petrodollar, right? Talk about the petrodollar. Talk about this BRICS thing. Is what is going on with all that? Because we just saw a list of nations that just joined, and I think a few of them were kind of significant in the grand scheme of the oil situation. Isn't that correct? What is that? What does that mean? And we hear people talking about the dollar collapse. It seems to be keep getting propped up. The dollar seems to keep getting propped up, and it's because of, it seems like, the petrodollar. Are we truly heading for a collapse of the American dollar? If that is the case, I mean, obviously it's like the coming of Jesus. Nobody really knows when it's going to happen, but I mean, what are we looking at with this?
Well, first I would say we're going to see at some point a final collapse of the dollar, but really we've already seen the collapse of the dollar because, so if we go back in time, following World War II, we had this system put in place called Bretton Woods. And what that meant was the United States held gold and the dollar would be backed by gold, and another nation could come to the United States and turn in its dollars in exchange for a fixed amount of gold. And so that effectively put the world on a gold standard. So currencies were relatively stable. The dollar was stable. The purchasing power of the dollar was stable. And then in 1971, President Nixon temporarily, they said, suspended that.
It's always temporary.
It's always temporary, Britt. Come on.
Yeah. So here we are, what, almost 53 years later, and it's still, that's still temporarily put in place. But since then, the dollar's lost around 98% of its purchasing power relative to gold. And that's why, I'll hear my parents and other people in my family say, well, I remember I used to go to the drive-in and I could get a burger for a quarter and fries for 10 cents. And it's wonderful. And I point out to them, well, you could still do that today because prior to 1964, quarters and dimes were real silver. They were 90% silver. And so if you still have some of those quarters, they go for about $7 for the quarters and about $3, $2.50 to $3 for the dime. So if you had that, you could probably get a burger and fries. And so it's not the cost of things going up when we talk about inflation. It's really the purchasing power of the dollar going down. So that's what we've been seeing the last 3 years, is we've seen an acceleration of that, but it's been going on our entire lives since 1971. And
it's a slow knife.
We're going to see it. Yeah, we're going to see it accelerate.
So it's a slow death.
It's got to a point where they've got us used to, oh, well, this is just the way things are. There's always inflation. And people don't realize for much of U.S. history, that was not normal. The purchasing price of our currency was stable because it was gold and silver. And it's actually written in the Constitution. It should be gold and silver. It's not supposed to be anything else, but like at a number of things, the Constitution just goes out the window. People on it.
It's a living, dying document.
But in terms of BRICS and these other nations, so other nations have been really cheated out of their resources for decades now, because we can print dollars at will, and we can go out and we can purchase real things like oil and copper and gold and silver and lumber and all sorts of useful things. And so they're starting to say, I don't know that I like this idea. And I don't know that I like, the idea that what the dollars I have are declining in value. And then they also don't like the idea of what we saw about 2 years ago when the war in Ukraine started. We saw a seizure of Russia's foreign reserves, which meant that their dollar reserves were frozen by the US government. Now they're talking about actually taking those dollars, giving them to Ukraine. So if you're another country, you're sitting around thinking, do I really want to hold dollars? Or are they going to do this to me next? And that's really accelerated the formation of BRICS, where they're looking for, is there an alternative system to this dollar-dominated global financial system? And I guess one thing that we should mention is, following Nixon closing that gold window in 1971, a couple of years later, was this deal that was made with Saudi Arabia, which created what you called the Petrodollar, where we agreed to protect the Saudi royal family in exchange for oil only being sold in dollars. And all of OPEC ended up agreeing to that. You remember we had Desert Storm back in 1990, 91. that was protecting Saudi Arabia from a potential invasion by Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And so we saw that petrodollar agreement at work right there.
Right.
And whenever any other nation, such as a lot of people don't know, Gaddafi, one of the last things he did was suggest selling Libyan oil for gold. And not long after that, Gaddafi was no more.
Yeah.
So we see that this is a system that gives the United States an enormous amount of power. It's what gives us the ability to project military power all across the globe and the ability to spend more on the military than any other nation because we print the world's world reserve currency at will. And so we can conjure oil out of thin air because oil is traded in dollars, and we can print dollars at will. And so we're seeing the system start to come to an end. We're seeing some of those nations say, well, we're going to take other currencies as well. We've seen Saudi Arabia say that in the past year. Recently, we had the United Arab Emirates say, we'll take other currencies, but we will not take the dollar, which was a first. So we're seeing a push for these types of things. And you mentioned the expansion of BRICS that now includes Iran, which is a significant player in both oil and natural gas. It includes Egypt, which controls the Suez Canal. As we've seen recently, that's very significant in regard to world trade, the Red Sea route through the Suez Canal. So that's about 1/6 of world trade goes through that canal. And so we're seeing a lot. We're seeing a power play on the world stage right now, almost a World War III, but it's not a shooting war. It's financial war. It's a communications war. It's a propaganda war. We're seeing wars in all these other areas. It may not be an all-out shooting war, and hopefully it won't come to that, but there's a play to create another system that's a financial system that's separate from the US-dominated global financial system.
And they're not hiding that either. I mean, they actually come out and say, we are offering a way, for countries to come off of that standard and really subjugate the United States to a third world country. Really, that's the goal.
The impact.